I'm Emily Chang in Boston, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Bitcoin jumps more than 20% past $5,000, but traders are at a loss to explain why. Plus, U.S.-China trade talks resume as Chinese Vice Premier Liu He leads a delegation to Washington. Could there be a breakthrough, and what'll it mean for global tech giants from Apple to Huawei? And lifting the curtain at YouTube as the video platform faces more controversies, staffers say managers aren't listening and that proposals to change recommendations and curb conspiracies are being sacrificed for engagement. But first to our top story, Bitcoin abruptly surged Tuesday after almost 3 months of low volatility. The world's most popular cryptocurrency soared to its highest level since November, at one point topping $5,000 and bringing smaller cryptocurrencies up with it. This after it plunged more than 70% last year. So could the crypto winter be nearing an end? Joining us to discuss, BitPay Chief Commercial Officer Sunny Singh and our Bloomberg Executive Editor Joe Weisenthal. So Joe, what do you think is happening here?
Well, it's really hard to say. No one has any good theories that I've seen for what suddenly caused Bitcoin to surge so much after really not doing anything for a long time. I do think it's striking the way every coin moved higher today, including all of the garbage ones way down on the list. I do think that brings to mind some questions about is the crypto winter really over, or is this just another blip?
So, Sunny, what's your take? Obviously, we know you're always more positive on Bitcoin. Assume you're pretty happy about this. But why do you think it happened?
Well, I'm not really sure, but it shows how global Bitcoin trading is. A lot of times these price spikes seem to happen late night in America, early morning in Europe, but always midday in Asia. So it shows how powerful Asia is in the Bitcoin trading market, which I think is very exciting and interesting because Bitcoin truly does trade 24/7 around the world. But from a fundamental perspective, I don't really know either as to what caused this move. Technically, the market's been a little skittish. I talked to my traders today, and they said, once it goes past 4,300, the resistance level, it kind of zooms from there because there's not a lot of demand either way, actually, in which way the market's going to go yet.
So, Joe, we know that volatility has been more stable, but other things that have concerned investors, hacks on exchanges, market manipulation, has any of that stuff changed?
No, it doesn't feel like it to me. I mean, the fundamental issues that people have raised, particularly around security, things like that, it's not like there's any more regulatory clarity or anything like that. So I think all those concerns remain. That being said, bull markets often start in anything before all the questions are answered. And if you wait until everything is resolved, and this is speaking for any asset class, if you wait until everything is resolved and you got, securities taken care of and institutional monies come in, and then by then it might be too late. So it's certainly plausible that you could have a bull market start with so much uncertainty. And I do think it's interesting that even though nobody can explain why there was such a sudden price surge in the middle of the night, the price is held. It's not like it immediately went back down and people and their selling was resumed. And I think that's an interesting phenomenon to take note of.
Sunny, what sort of things on the regulatory and institutional side are improving in your view?
Yeah, I think every day, again, that Bitcoin stays active is a plus for the Bitcoin industry, right? So regulations in America are pretty stable that way. Europe's pretty stable as well. What would really boost the market, I think, is if you see countries like China, India, or Russia, the three big ones that have really been, the governments have been not allowing Bitcoin to be allowed in those countries. If those three countries, any of those three countries change, you could see a big boost to the industry, actually. But as far as, the fundamentals, you're still waiting on companies like Fidelity, which kind of did a soft launch to launch in a big way. Goldman Sachs to get in the space, a Square, even an ETF from a BlackRock or something like that. Once those big companies come in, but as Joe said, by then you might have missed the boom up on the way up. So there's a lot of institutional money on the sidelines that's waiting to get in, and maybe they think now is the time because the bottom might have already been hit.
But Bitcoin is still far from mainstream. Joe, what are you going to be watching this year? What would make you more optimistic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very skeptical that we'll see anything resembling mainstream adoption anytime soon. I'm very skeptical that we're going to see, a whole lot of day-to-day use case anytime imminently. I think, there are certain parts of the world and certain functions for which cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin in particular, makes a lot of sense. So obviously, anywhere in which the government is cracking down on people's freedom to transact, on people's ability to move wealth in and out of a border, in and out of banks, that is a potential opportunity, I think, for Bitcoin. So the more we see people use it, not so much in the broad sense, but the more we see people use Bitcoin in the narrow sense, where there is like a very logical case why Bitcoin offers something that traditional payment rails don't, that to me would be a good sign of it continuing to take hold.
Sonny, where are we going to see Bitcoin being used in, as Joe says, a more logical case where there actually are benefits to using it where there isn't with traditional currency?
Yeah, so again, I think Bitcoin has a lot of regional use cases around the world, especially outside of America. So it could be remittance type, using for remittance in Asia. You can use a currency hedge if you live in Latin America. People use it as digital gold, right? People use it as a kind of online payments mechanism that don't have credit cards. At BitPay, we just signed up a Fortune 500 company called Avnet, which is one of the largest IT providers in the world. They use this for B2B payments, so people in Asia can make multi-million-dollar payments buying hardware equipment using Bitcoin because it's cheaper, quicker than a bank wire, or credit cards aren't possible. So you're starting to see that use case really develop around the world that's outside of America, where in America, most people just use it for speculation, but outside the world, Bitcoin is really catching on fast.
All right, Sonny Singh, BitPay Chief Commercial Officer, and our own Joe Weisenthal, thank you both. We'll keep watching. Coming up, Bloomberg Tech investigates how YouTube let objectionable videos flourish on the site. We will bring you the key takeaways next with the reporter who wrote it. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Another day, another content issue on a social platform. According to a new Bloomberg investigation, managers at Google's YouTube aren't doing everything they can to curb toxic and misleading videos on the platform. Staffers tell us instead it is all about increasing engagement, the primary measure of views, time spent, and interactions with online videos. Multiple current and former employees say executives, including CEO Susan Wojcicki, were given suggestions on how to deal with malicious content. However, they say they were told not to, quote, rock the boat. Joining us now, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Bergen, who wrote this piece. So, Mark, the title of your story is pretty damning. YouTube managers ignored warnings, let toxic videos run rampant. What exactly did they ignore?
There's a series of events dating back to you go back to maybe 2012 or so. That was when YouTube put in this internal goal to get to 1 billion hours of watch time, and they sort of rejiggered their entire technical infrastructure based on optimizing how long people watch videos. And so over the years, particularly since the 2016 election, we had a lot of people internally bringing up this sort of the downsides of that, where they're sort of optimized for outrage. And so you saw people on the political fringes going viral on the site. What you saw with kids content, where channels like Toy Freaks, there were sort of these really aggressive, sometimes violent pranks that flourished in part because of the algorithms just favor these engagements over and over again.
So YouTube gave us a statement saying our primary focus has been tackling some of the platform's toughest content challenges. We've taken a number of significant steps, including updating our recommendation systems to prevent the spread of harmful misinformation, improving the news experience on YouTube, bringing the number of people focused on content issues across Google to 10,000, investing in machine learning to be able to more quickly and find and remove violative content, and reviewing and updating our policies. YouTube has made some changes. Are employees just saying it's not enough?
Yeah, I mean, pretty clear. Like the past 2 years, they have made a series of changes and fairly radical ones if you look at them historically, right? Recently, they eliminated comments on a lot of videos aimed at kids, and people at YouTube have been there for a long time tell me this was like a huge shift. Right? There has been this debate about comments for a long time. They kept comments intact in part because they wanted YouTube to be a social media platform. You know, what the key issue here is that the company is shifting around for what they call responsible growth. And that is a metric where they're using things like user surveys to try to sense about how people feel after they watch videos. It's a really tricky thing to deal, and they haven't, a tricky thing to execute on as a strategy. And they haven't exactly told investors, the public, and it seems like a lot of their employees exactly what that looks like.
Now, YouTube on Twitter has released some follow-up statements saying that Susan Wojcicki specifically has been across this, has made this a priority. But in your story, employees are saying that actually she personally is not making this a priority. What exactly are employees telling you?
So I think, consistently the thing I've heard from people that worked under Susan is not that she doesn't care about these issues, particularly in the past couple of years. I think especially around the kids' content was sort of an eye-opening moment for her and her leadership team. The consistent theme is more paralysis. For a number of reasons, whether it's concern about being seen as anti-conservative, concern about the changes they would make to YouTube's business and its advertising platform, concern about the changes it would make to creators. That paralysis has led to them stalling and inertia. And certainly, like if you look at anti-vaccination, we have some new data. The number of videos that are promoting anti-vaccination theories, YouTube's been aware of this for a long time. It's a series of events where they become kind of a publicity nightmare, and then they're forced to take action. They recently started categorizing these anti-vaccination videos, what they call borderline content, so they'll no longer be recommended. What they haven't shared, externally at least, is if those changes on the recommendation engine and a lot of the changes that Wojcicki has brought have made an impact on their engagement, on their business, any of the metrics that they're using for their employees and for the company.
All right, Mark Bergen, really important story to take a look at Mark Bergen's investigation of YouTube. Thank you so much for bringing us that report. Meantime, U.S. lawmakers and privacy advocates have spent the last year hammering Facebook to change its behavior, prompting billionaire CEO Mark Zuckerberg to propose a new vision for government oversight of the internet. This as Facebook faces multiple government investigations. To discuss, we are joined now by Natasha Lamb, managing partner of Arjuna Capital and a shareholder in Facebook. Natasha, good to see you here in Boston.
Nice to see you as well.
So what's your take on Mark Zuckerberg's suggestion about a global government-regulated framework for internet regulation, given the backlash we've seen to this proposal over the last 24 hours?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of, a little bit of an admission that they can't handle it, what we would like to see as investors, them to get ahead of, they haven't been able to. And, the government is going to come in and clean up the mess. So I really think it's an admission. It's too much for them to deal with. They're looking for the government to come in, tell them what to do, tell them what not to do, and then the accountability doesn't sit so much perhaps with the platform.
So then do you think his suggestion makes sense? Because the critics are saying Mark Zuckerberg doesn't get to make the rules.
Well, Mark Zuckerberg has a lot of power, and he's made a lot of rules so far. So if he's coming out and saying that he wants government regulation, I think that's going to have sway. He certainly proved the case by not managing the platform well, that it's needed. So, what we would like to see, and the reason we started engaging with Facebook 2 years ago on content governance and fake news and election interference and all of that stuff, was we want to see them get ahead of the issue. They've not gotten ahead of the issue. It continues to be a game of whack-a-mole. And frankly, I don't think that they have the answers.
Is Facebook too big for its own good?
Yes. It's
well, you're an investor, so Elizabeth Warren is saying Facebook should be broken up, designated as a utility, separated from WhatsApp and Instagram. Is that something that you would support?
Well, I think what we keep hearing is the problem's too big, it's too much scale, we can't deal with all of these issues, it's got to be AI that comes in and fixes the problem. That's not working. We see Instagram, which is a Facebook asset, being perhaps more poorly managed than Facebook itself. And so, if you can't handle kind of your core assets, how can you handle your other assets? And I think there is a case to be made that a smaller company would result in more innovation, and they could have a better handle on it, frankly.
So how concerned are you about these multiple investigations? The FTC looking into whether they violated that 2011 consent decree, the SEC looking into privacy violations and whether they disclosed the consequences as transparently as they should have to investors. The Department of Housing and Urban Development looking into whether Facebook discriminates against blacks and Latinos when it comes to housing and credit and jobs. I mean, that must be very concerning to you.
There's a lot that's concerning, and I think that from our perspective, looking at what's happened over the last couple of years, all of these revelations, there's a lot that's wrong. And from the investor perspective, this is not a good thing that there are all these investigations, but the company needs to clean up its act. And there's more at stake here than simply Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or any of that, because what's happening is, we have so much misinformation, so much hate, all that's being spread over these platforms, that it's bad for our democracy in terms of an informed electorate, and it's certainly, of course, bad for investors and users who are losing trust in the platform.
So what do you think it means for investors? I mean, given that you're a shareholder, say Facebook is broken up, is that better for value for you, or not?
It could be, yeah. I mean, I think there is room for disruption, and if Facebook were to sell off an Instagram asset and be able to focus on its core business, that could possibly be a good thing for investors. So I don't think that just having giant tech behemoths is the answer, because there is a ceiling on growth. So maybe it is a smaller, more nimble company.
All right, Natasha Lamb, Arjuna Capital, you are sticking with us. We're going to talk about something very important coming up next. It is National Equal Pay Day here in the United States, and Arjuna Capital has released its second annual Gender Pay Scorecard. We're going to tell you how the biggest tech companies made out next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. In the United States, April 2nd is also known as Equal Pay Day. It is a day to recognize the push or lack thereof for pay parity among men and women in corporate America. Arjuna Capital has released its second annual Gender Pay Scorecard, ranking 46 of the world's largest companies on pay based on gender and race. This year, the scorecard gave an A rating to only one company, Citigroup. Arjuna also passed out failing grades to half the companies surveyed. So where did big tech land? We're back with Arjuna Capital managing partner Natasha Lamb. So Natasha, I want to start with the good news.
Yes.
What did Citigroup do right?
So if you recall, in January, Citigroup was literally the first company in the world to reveal its median gender pay gap and its U.S. median racial pay gap. And what that means is it didn't use an adjusted number, which is what the disclosures that we've gotten from most companies so far, which is an equal pay for equal work number. Most of those numbers we've seen from companies have been adjusted, and they're around 99 cents to parity. So if you and I were in the same position, we'd be making around the same if I was a man and you were a woman. But what Citigroup did further was to actually publish their median number. So if you take all the men and all the women in an organization, you say, take the middle person, what are they making? What's the man making versus the woman? There's a much bigger gap. And that's actually how equal pay is measured in the United States when we talk about Equal Pay Day. Women are paid 80 cents on the dollar. That's the median earnings. So Citigroup, in response to a proposal from Arjuna Capital, came out with this data and stepped up as a leader and really set a new standard.
So not only are they releasing more data and being more transparent, the data looks good. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the data doesn't look great. Those median numbers don't look great for most companies. It was a 29% median pay gap as compared to their 99 cents equal pay gap, right? And for minorities in the US, it was 93 cents on the dollar. So it doesn't look great. They squeaked out an A. They got an 86 out of 100, but they are the only company to receive an A in the scorecard.
So Apple and Intel in the tech world, you gave them a B. You gave several tech companies failing grades, Oracle and HP. Why?
So the Bs, some of those companies were As or A minuses last year. We added.
So they got worse?
They didn't get worse. But we did add one new criteria this year. So we're ranking across 10 different quantitative factors. It's very transparent. And we added the median racial pay gap in the U.S. That's a statistic that Citigroup put out this year and that no other companies had put out. And it set a new standard. So we added that to the mix. So some of those companies that were getting A- are now getting Bs. But they have made some improvements with their equal pay for equal work numbers, their global coverage of how many employees they're reporting on, and then the companies that failed. I mean, it was half of the list, and so
Oracle, HP, also outside the tech world, Marriott, McDonald's, Walmart. Why did they fail?
Yes, because they're not disclosing, and if they are, it's only because of a regulatory mandate in the UK. So some of those companies, like McDonald's, have to report in the UK, and those numbers look okay, but those are only 2 out of 10 data points that we're looking for.
We are seeing some steam and momentum behind equal pay regulation in the United States. Do you think we need laws here?
I think that it's been very slow. It's been more of a ground game. States, including Massachusetts and New York and California, have started to improve their state laws. You recently saw a judge in the U.S. overturn a freeze that had been put on by the Trump administration that was going to require companies with over 100 employees to report their gender and racial pay data to the government. And so that's actually quite promising. That's similar to what's happening in Europe. And a recent study showed that even when companies are reporting just to the government, not fully transparently, which is what we're looking for, they actually improve, they narrow the gender pay gap, they hire more women, they move more women into positions of leadership, and that's really where you see the performance benefits.
So, new SurveyMonkey pullout shows that 50% of men believe that the pay gap, the gender pay gap, is made up.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that when men, to be quite frank, are still running most of these companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sad. I think there's a lot of misinformation, so you can look at it on an equal pay for equal work basis. Even in my industry, finance, I'm a financial advisor. The gap for financial advisors for equal pay for equal work is 62 cents on the dollar, and so that's pretty remarkable. But even for even if men and women in the same jobs are being paid the same, there's still a median gap because there isn't equal opportunity for women and minorities at these companies, and there should be, and that's where it makes a difference, and it makes a difference to performance.
Absolutely. Natasha Lamb, Managing Partner, Arjuna Capital, thank you for doing this work.
Thank you.
Important work that you are doing. All right, coming up, turning data into profit. The startup Segment just closed a massive funding round, making it tech's latest unicorn. We're going to talk to the CEO next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in Boston. Segment, a startup that helps companies manage the ever-growing streams of data they collect about their customers, has just raised $175 million in Series D funding, giving it a $1.5 billion valuation. Here to discuss the company's rapid growth, we're joined by Peter Reinhardt, the CEO of Segment, as well as Bloomberg Tech editor Ann Vandermeer, both in San Francisco. So, Peter, you've got clients ranging from IBM to Glossier using the product. How does it work?
Yeah, so Segment helps the brands that you love, the Glossiers of the world, the Levi's of the world, really deliver a great customer experience. And the way we do that is we help companies unify all of their data that exists in their four walls into a single construct that then they can use to deliver that experience. And because it's all the data within their four walls, we really also help them with customer privacy and managing all those privacy preferences across their global brand. And I think these companies are starting to realize that they need something like Segment because CRM is no longer enough to deliver what they need to their customers.
And you're seeing more legacy companies like Salesforce scrambling into this industry, and overall investor interest seems strong. What is driving that?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the historical industry, like CRM is obviously a huge category. If you go back 20 years to like a bank branch and you walk into a bank branch, the branch manager is going to know who you are. They're going to know your business. And that's because they've been using a CRM. But if you fast forward to what this looks like today, when you call the bank or you open the mobile app, they have no idea who you are. And that's because the sort of world that we're operating in has shifted very much from an in-person situation to an online world where you have touch points across help desks, CRMs, mobile apps, websites, et cetera. And in that world, the CRM is not enough. And so I think what you're seeing from an investor perspective is that CRM was a huge category, but now it's a small portion of all the data that's out there. And there's a new category emerging, which is going to help companies solve that issue. So you're right that a slew of large sort of legacy tools are sort of scrambling to glue together their acquisitions and make a play here. But the reality is it really requires a fresh take.
This question to you, Anne. Segment is a company, no offense, Peter, that many people might not have heard of. Now it's worth more than $1 billion. Why do you think investors are getting more interested in these startups that aren't household names, enterprise startups specifically?
Right.
Yeah,
so right now you have, one thing is right now you have a lot of attention focused on the consumer-facing companies. You have IPOs from Lyft, Uber, Pinterest, Slack, a lot of attention around that. But what venture investors are talking a lot about right now is these companies that you might not have heard of that are kind of the next wave. These enterprise-facing companies that are focusing on businesses rather than consumers as potentially driving a lot of growth and having a customer that's willing to pay a lot of money and willing to pay a lot of money reliably.
Now, Peter, your company talks about protecting data, privacy preferences, first-party data. Obviously, this is a big concern right now. What do you do differently when it comes to how you handle your data than you think that other companies do?
Yeah, so specifically when you look in the realm of privacy, there's a group of companies that are called data brokers, and these are companies that buy and sell data with abandon. We think those companies are super sketchy, and that's not what Segment does. We're only interested in helping companies understand and make use of the data that's within their four walls, so how they interact with their customers on their websites, in their stores. We're basically helping them manage the data from that direct customer experience and give a more authentic, better experience based on that data within their four walls. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that if you're a global brand and you've spread across many regions, across many sub-brands, it can be really challenging to appropriately recognize customer preferences around communication and privacy and how data is shared. And so you actually need some sort of infrastructure in order to understand and roll those out globally across all those different sub-brands, and that's an area where we help. We help drive consistency across global brands and how they respect those preferences.
So a question for you, Anne. It seems like we have been minting unicorns faster than usual lately. Do you get a sense that a number of startups out there are trying to raise money before the economy tanks, or is this because of a flood of venture capital into the system?
Yes, I think you're seeing a lot of these billion-dollar-plus companies. I mean, for example, EasyCater, which delivers food to businesses, just raised a $1.5 billion or $1.25 billion valuation, and they said they didn't really need the money. They were just raising just in case the economy tanked and there was a funding winter. And then, one thing these startups are thinking is that worst-case scenario, when the apocalypse does come or the economy does go down, they'll have this money in the bank just in case.
All right, Bloomberg's Ann Vandermeer and Peter Reinhardt, CEO of Segment. Thank you both for stopping by. Well, auto companies around the world are making the transition to autonomous and electric cars. Ford taking its next step in that direction with a big announcement out of Europe. Bloomberg's David Weston caught up with Stephen Armstrong, Ford of Europe chairman from Amsterdam, to discuss.
If we think about electrification in total, so that is hybrid and full battery electric, we think that by kind of the middle of the next decade, it'll be 50% of vehicles sold will be electrified to some degree. And we think probably in 2025, something in the order of 20% of the fleet will be full battery electric vehicles. So hybrids will still be a substantial part of new vehicles sold because they offer a level of flexibility and capability to those people that need some electrification electrification, but don't, for whatever reason, want to go to a full battery electric vehicle. So we see that mild hybrids, full hybrids, and plug-in hybrids are going to be a very important part of the powertrain lineup for many years to come yet.
As various automobile companies around the world move to electrification as well as autonomous vehicles, there's a lot of teaming up, if I can put it that way, going on. And of course, Volkswagen and Ford have been talking about various ways they can work together on both EVs and AVs. How does Volkswagen figure, if at all, into this electrification announcement that you're making today?
The announcements we made today are not a part of the alliance that we're forming with Volkswagen. So these are products that we're going to be producing now, before we get into more discussion around the potential for sharing electrification technologies. So with the Volkswagen alliance, thus far we've announced that we will be collaborating on our next generation of commercial vehicles, so our smaller pickup trucks and light commercial vehicles. So the news that we've shared today is not linked to the VW alliance. It's products that we'll bring to market before we see any benefits of that collaboration with Volkswagen.
There's a great deal of news every day back here in the United States as well as over in Europe involving your business. And let me take two specific instances. Brexit, which, as we've already talked to Mr. Hackett, your CEO, said has affected your decision-making in Europe. And also we have the possible trade dispute with the United States and Europe. How does Brexit, how does the possible trade dispute with Europe potentially affect what you will be doing in Europe, and specifically with electric vehicles?
Well, Brexit, of course, would, a hard Brexit or a no-deal Brexit would be a disaster, we think, for our industry in the UK, for Ford Motor Companies and the rest of the industry, because we've spent the last 40 years working with a supply chain that can move goods and services freely across the borders with Europe. And so we have a supply chain that is structured specifically to do that. So we've been encouraging both the British government and also the authorities in Brussels to come to an agreement that will allow us to maintain frictionless movement of goods at the border and tariff-free exports and imports, of course, because anything that makes it more difficult to move materials or products around Europe, between the UK and mainland Europe, will limit our ability to continue to invest potentially in the UK. We love our business in the UK. It's an important part of Ford Motor Company in Europe, and we want to continue to have a big business in the UK. But anything that would impact our competitiveness in the UK would cause us to think again about our future footprint and where we'd make our investment. So it is an issue that we take very seriously, and I encourage the UK government to find a way through the current impasse.
That was Stephen Armstrong, Ford of Europe chairman, with our own David Weston. Coming up, U.S.-China trade negotiations are about to resume. We'll look at how big tech is influencing the talks between Beijing and Washington. This is Bloomberg. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He is in Washington Wednesday for trade talks, both sides trying to keep up the momentum in what could be the final stretch of negotiations. Bloomberg Businessweek has been following the story closely, especially how it could impact global tech companies like Apple and Huawei. Max Chafkin edits and writes about technology for the magazine. He joins us now. So, Max, how could whatever is decided in these trade negotiations affect global tech giants like Huawei and Apple?
Right. So a lot of the back and forth has been, around stuff that has nothing to do with tech, aluminum tariffs, automobiles, that sort of thing, soybeans. But in the background, there has been this concern, and some of this is actually involved in the negotiation, and some of it is sort of happening in the background, that basically China's, big tech companies are growing very powerful, and also that China has, made life difficult for American companies. So although this wouldn't be necessarily directly in the, whatever agreement there's the possibility that the U.S. could sort of, go a little easier on Huawei. Right now, the U.S. seems to be, basically doing everything in its power, both to get, law enforcement to bring actions against Huawei, but also to pressure allies to stop buying Huawei equipment. And then there is this question of, could China make it easier for some of the big cloud computing companies to operate in the country? And that could actually end up being in part of this agreement when we finally see it.
Now, what about on the flip side? How are big tech companies like Apple and Huawei influencing the negotiations? I mean, Apple, for example, has certainly spoken out about tariffs. We've seen Apple iPhone sales slide in China.
Right. Well, it's everybody's got their own point of view. I mean, Huawei has been taking almost a siege mentality. I mean, you know, the charges that were brought against Huawei's CFO in Canada, Huawei has been pushing back, you know, vigorously against that, saying that they're politically motivated. You know, meanwhile, Apple is you know, basically trying to argue for, you know, some sort of accommodation because you know, so much of its revenue is dependent on selling technology in China. I mean, the bottom line is all of these companies to succeed as businesses need to have basically open markets. And then on the other side of it, you have political leaders basically in both countries who see the big technology companies increasingly as, you know, something akin to weapons, at least economic weapons, where in the U.S. people are worried about Huawei, you know, potentially getting too close to, you know, American communications networks, and maybe in China, fears of these big American technology giants, you know, imposing, you know, whatever, American standards on Chinese citizens.
Meantime, you've already got many companies that have reconfigured their supply chains. I mean, we just sat down with the CEO of GoPro, who's already moved a lot of China-based production to Mexico, says it's working just great, and they may never move it back. So, I mean, have the trade tensions led to permanent changes in the flow of supply and goods already?
Well, I think some of this is trade tension. Some of it is just economics. I mean, as manufacturing has become more mechanized, as you don't need as many people to make these goods, that makes you know, places like Mexico or even the United States more viable to keep while keeping things cheap. And the other thing is, obviously, wages in China are going up. And China itself is trying to get further away from just kind of being the factory to the world and also developing technology. So I think that's playing into it. But yeah, of course, like if you're a small company like GoPro, you know, having a little bit of cushion, not being as beholden to the you know, the events of the day is definitely going to be, you know, advantageous. Although GoPro certainly wants to sell its stuff in China, so the trade negotiations will have an impact there.
So what happens next? We know that these trade talks are resuming this week. What is the process for the next few days?
Well, so they're, you know, assumedly they're ironing out these various compromises. We're seeing, you know, little signs of what might be in the agreement. For instance, last week there was, you know, maybe it felt like a trial balloon, China signaling that it would be open to American or foreign cloud computing companies controlling some data in the country, which would be a new thing and which could be part of that agreement. But the idea is, you know, assuming everything goes well, you know, we get an agreement later this month, and Trump and Xi both sign it, and then we go back to normal. But if the last you know, couple of years have taught us anything, you know, this is a very volatile situation. Both countries are negotiating, and I think at any point, you know, someone could walk away from the table, or at least sort of act as if they're walking away from the table. So that could prolong things further.
And how soon could we expect a breakthrough, or at least some resolution?
Well, I think it's as I said, it's a matter of weeks. On the other hand, you know, if there were a public statement or something, I think it could happen more quickly than that. And again, it could also drag on.
All right, Bloomberg Business Week's Max Chafkin, thanks so much for that update. You can hear from the magazine's reporters and editors every Saturday and Sunday on Bloomberg Television and radio. Still ahead, closing the gender STEM gap. We are going to tell you about a company that is partnering with Disney to use kid-friendly inventors kits to promote girls' STEM education across the country. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Data shows that the STEM gender gap starts to widen around the 4th grade. That is why Little Bits is starting at the point of what they believe is the highest leverage, 10-year-old girls. A $4 million pilot program will give 15,000 girls in California Little Bits starter packs, an online inventor program, and mentorship with a STEM professional. Joining us to discuss, Little Bits CEO Aya Badir. Aya, thank you so much for joining us. So first of all, tell us why you're starting at 10 years old?
So at age 5, girls and boys are almost equally interested in science and technology. And then by the age of 6, girls start seeing themselves as less brilliant. By the age 9, the gap starts showing up. And the gap kind of continues to grow. And girls keep kind of dropping off in their interests and in their confidence in pursuing STEM. So we want to start at a point of high leverage, but we also want to sustain their interest and really give them some support tools so that they can continue even after they graduate and they go into the workforce.
Now, Little Bits makes what you call electronic building blocks, a series of magnetic bits that snap together that create inventions, anything from an instrument to a robot. Tell us how these kits work and how these kits specifically will work for these 10-year-old girls.
So Little Bits is an education company, and we are reinventing education through hardware, software, and content. Our hardware platform is really akin to Lego for electronics. So you're snapping bits together, you're making robots, you're making circuits, you're learning how to code, you're creating anything from a prank for your siblings to an alarm to an invention for sustainability. And through the hands-on learning process, studies show that kids are able to retain concepts of science and engineering and really feel confident because they're able to create things that are relevant for them and that are important for them. We also we have an online learning platform called gem.com where kids can meet other kids, they can share their inventions, they can get inspired by each other, and they can learn through video because that's sort of how they're comfortable learning these days. And so when you combine a online learning platform with hardware, you're able to really kind of sustain their interest and get them to get excited about STEM and feel like this is something not only relevant for them, but something that inspires them to want to be creative and inventive.
So how did you get Disney on board, and what is their role here?
So Disney, we've had a relationship with Disney for a number of years. We've joined the Disney Accelerator. We did 2 partnerships with Disney, with Lucasfilm, a Droid Inventor Kit, and then with Marvel with an Avengers Hero Inventor Kit. But actually, this partnership is not within Disney licensing. It's within the Disney philanthropy department. And basically, they're funding this not-for-profit effort so that they can really support girls in engagement in STEM and really preparing them for workforce of the future. So we have a great relationship with them. They've been very committed to diversity in their characters, diversity in their company, very much supporting programs that teach kids how to code, that bring technology into hospitals to inspire kids as well, bring it to the classroom. So they're a great partner, and they really believe in this mission, and so it was a very natural fit.
So what kind of progress are you seeing in the STEM gap between boys and girls? I mean, I've been told by organizations like Code.org that, more children are coding than ever before, and that they are now almost perfectly diverse in terms of gender. Are you seeing that?
So the good news is that there's a lot more awareness about the problem. We're able to talk about it. We're on national TV talking about it, so that's really exciting. I think some of the misconceptions that we hear a lot is that it's sort of a one-and-done deal, where if you expose kids to learn a skill or learn how to code or do something at a particular age, you're able to really solve the problem and solve the gender gap. The reality is that girls are exposed to a lot of stereotypes, media stereotypes, self-imposed stereotypes, sometimes confidence problems. Sometimes their families are not very supportive. And then when they enter the workplace, there's discrimination that they have to face. There's fear of failure that they're often really sort of imposing on themselves. And so we really have to support girls with more tools, whether they're social, psychological, giving them comfort with failing and iterating, and really allowing them to see that they are themselves the change makers of tomorrow, so that they can sustain themselves throughout these obstacles when they come across them.
So, you're a young woman entrepreneur. You have experienced firsthand what it's like to be a woman working in technology. I've really focused on what the tech industry can do to improve the representation of women in the tech industry. And often what you hear is, this is a pipeline problem. This needs to be done in the education system. It's on parents. It's on teachers. It's on popular culture. I mean, would you agree with that? Or, is there a lot to be done at every stage of the process, at every stage, as young girls become women and move into the workforce? Is there work that the tech industry itself can do?
There is so much work that the tech industry has to do. I think it's easy to defer blame and say it's a pipeline issue, it's because we're not getting enough women into the pool. The reality is even the women that are in the pool are dropping out, and they're dropping out because they're facing discrimination in the workplace, because they're not being promoted as often, even on objective measures, because they're facing sort of microaggressions on a daily basis. They're not being representing in boards and things like that. So I think the tech industry has a very big responsibility to do. We notice now when we see more women on investor committees and in VC funds, more investments in women-led technology companies are happening. So you need them sort of at every level.
Littlebit CEO and founder, great work you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us, Aya Badir. Good to have you here on the show. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology from Boston. We are live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology. And be sure to follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.